Good morning, everyone. Today we will talk about cultural and cross cultural psychology, starting with cultural psychology. Cultural psychology focuses on understand how culture shapes psychological process. It studies the relationship between the individual's mind and the cultural context they live in. One of its core assumptions is that psychological phenomena cannot be separated from culture. In other words, mind and culture are deeply interconnected. For example, cultural psychologists might ask, how does growing up in Japan influence concepts of self compared to growing up in the United States? Or how do cultural values shape emotions, memory, or moral reasoning? The main goal is not to compare cultures, but to deeply understand how psychological experiences are created and shaped within a specific cultural context.
Now let's take a look at cross-cultural psychology and how it differs from cultural psychology. Cross-cultural psychology examines similarities and differences in psychological functioning across cultures. Its goal is to test the universality of psychological theories and identify which aspects of human behavior are culture specific and which ones are universal. For example, researchers may compare levels of individualism and collectivism between the USA and China, or study how emotions are expressed in different societies. Methodologically, cross-cultural psychology often uses standardized surveys, experiments, and compare studies across multiple cultures. Um, in other words, cultural psychology focuses on understanding psychological processes within one cultural context, while cross-cultural psychology focuses on comparing cultures to find universal and culture-specific patterns. I can also add that this kind of psychology looks at how tradition, values, belief, and social norms influence the way people think, feel, and interact. Instead of comparing cultures, it also tries to understand the deep relationship between culture and psychological processes in one specific group. That's why this field helps to explain why people in different cultures may experience the world in different ways. And in conclusion, we can say that both fields study the relationship between culture and psychology, but while cross-cultural psychology is more focused on comparisons to find general patterns, cultural psychology is dedicated to understanding the unique influence on a single culture on human behavior.
Hi, my name is Veronica Gonzalez Bertieri, and finally, we're going to explore some major cultural differences identified by research. One important dimension is individualism and collectivism. Individualistic cultures, in this case, like the United States, value personal goals, independence, and self expression. In contrast, collectivistic cultures, like, for example, in this case, Japan, or actually many countries in Latin America, emphasize group harmony, family family obligations, and the most important is community over individual desires. Another key dimension is power distance, which refers to how much inequality in power is accepted. In high power distance cultures, like for example Malaysia or also Mexico, hierarchical structures are respected and authority is rarely questioned. In the other hand, low power distance cultures like Denmark or New Zealand prefer equality, and also in some way leaders are expected to be approachable. Cultures also vary in masculinity and femininity. More masculine cultures like Japan also and also Germany value competition, achievement, and all success. In the other hand, is feminine cultures like, for example, Sweden or the Netherlands emphasize cooperation, quality of life, and all related with well-being. Uncer- Uncertainty avoidance is another difference that we had found in some cultures. For example, in this case, Greece prefer clear rules and predictability. And also, other countries, like for example Singapore, are more comfortable with ambiguity and everything related with change. We can also mention long term and also short term orientation. In this case, long term oriented cultures focus on saving, perseverance, rewards, and while short term oriented cultures like the United States focus on quick results and present satisfaction in all ways. Finally, we can talk about indulgence and restraint. Highlights whether societies encourage pleasures and enjoyment of life. In this case, we can talk about Mexico, or promote self discipline and control over everything related with desires. In this case, we can talk about Russia. All of these dimensions shape how people communicate, whether directly or indirectly, in high context or low context styles, and influence their values, their social behaviors, and the most important is their decisions related with everything with related with our culture. So that's it. Thank you for listening. What we are found about cultural differences.